Welcome to Westmont's Compelling Conversations. I'm Gayle D. Beebe, president of Westmont College. In Compelling Conversations, I engage scholars, leaders, authors, and members of our community in discussions that inform us about essential issues and encourage us to take meaningful action. Well, Denise, I wanted the opportunity to interview you. I wanted to talk about really your spiritual autobiography, some of the things that you've shared with me, some of the things you've shared through the years, your upbringing, your sense of the presence of Christ, coming to Westmont, what that was like, your career since Westmont, your involvement as president of the Alumni Association, and then now your role on the Board of Trustees and what you hope for that.
Well, my parents integrated, and I think this may have been in my biography, but my spiritual biography, but my parents chose to integrate a German Methodist church in 1963, late 1962
Wow.
or 1963. That was kind of their political stand in the midst of the civil rights movement. And we moved from Los Angeles, and the largest well, at that time we were all Methodist, but the largest Methodist church east of the Rockies, which is a church called Holman United Methodist Church. And actually, it's the church that Jim Lawson eventually became the pastor of. And that's how he became a family friend, because my grandmother was in that church, and we never cut complete ties because my godparents were members and my parents' friends were members. And, it's just like, you don't leave that church you were born into, right? And so we integrated Altadena, and there were 2 or 3 other Black families. And so, of course, we all became very close because I guess safety in numbers or whatever. I mean, we were all kind of the same age and so forth. One of those couples was a little older than the rest, and their youngest child was maybe 5 or 6 years older than I. And they kind of took me, he was a son, and their daughters were much older. And so they always kind of had a special interest in me. And when I accepted Christ at 14, Abe Coleman was he was just one of those old school, I love Jesus, on his job, sharing Christ, not obnoxious, but just, he was going to be a witness. And so I think that he saw me as a big opportunity to teach me his ways. I mean, my parents, they weren't going to hide under a bushel, but were never like Abe was. And his wife wasn't either. And so Abe and Doretha and I became really close, and their son came to Westmont.
Okay. Wow.
His name was, he died since COVID.
Wow.
But his name was Ron Coleman, and he was in track and field. And I don't know how Abe met Rath Shelton.
Oh, sure.
But somewhere in their lives, they met. And I think that Rath had helped get Abe all, exercised about Ron coming to Westmont. And Ron had interest in track and field, but not much interest in Westmont. And as I got closer to time to come to college, my parents would let Abe and Doretha take me to the moon. If I said I was going with them, there were no even questions asked. Not when I was coming home, not if I was coming home, not where we were going. It was just like, okay. And so one Saturday morning, they called and they go, we want to take Denise to Santa Barbara. My parents were like, okay, fine. They came and picked me up, and we went to Westmont. And Gayle, I drove in the gates and I'm like, whoa.
Oh.
And Ron wasn't there. And so we just walked around and they showed me all these different parts of the college. And then shortly about that time, I had started going to youth group at Lake Avenue. And it was during the time that Ray Ortlund was on the board, and tons of, like half the youth group graduated to go to Westmont, And so I had the fever, and my junior summer, the summer between my junior and senior year, my parents are driving all up and down the state of California, taking me to Stanford and to UOP and to all these other campuses. And I'm like, I'm going to Westmont. Okay, so more schools. I'm going to Westmont. And so I wouldn't apply anywhere. And they couldn't, you can't make a 17-year-old apply. So finally they're like, we don't know this place. We're sure it's going to be a disaster, but you can apply. And I applied in the summer. After high school graduation, I applied and was accepted. And the first time they saw Westmont was the day they came and brought me here. And kind of the rest is history. They quickly fell in love and decided it was the perfect place for me and all that entailed. That's kind of that part of the story. Recently, as I've been thinking about the events of the last year in particular, my coming to Westmont was really interesting because in 1970, Pasadena Unified School District. Well, my mom was a teacher, and so we were in and out of private schools based on our academic development and socialization. And so I was headed to a Catholic girls' school, but they were out of spots for non-residential students.
Okay.
And my mom and dad were just like, well, why are we going to sit on our patio and look across the hill at the Catholic school and pay for her to be a boarding student? So they decided not to pursue that. But I start high school, Gayle, in September of 1970, as Pasadena is the first school district, Pasadena Unified is the first school district out of the Deep South to have court-ordered busing for the purpose of the desegregation of schools.
Oh, my goodness.
And I, through a set of circumstances that don't matter, I ended up at what had previously been the white high school. And
what was the white high school?
Pasadena High.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Pasadena High. The black kids went to John Muir. The white kids went to Pasadena High. So my mom sends me, she's a teacher, so school is starting for her. And she sends me to the high school to register for my classes. I mean, it's easy. You have one elective, PE, and you're assigned to the other classes. So I go, I meet the counselor. I'm coming from a private school, so I have no context of like finding a class and having a counselor and all this stuff. But, I'm reasonably intelligent and have specific instructions. And I go and I meet with my counselor, who looks at my little transcript from the Lutheran school, as well as my record with Pasadena Unified. And he tells me that I don't have to take any, now I finished 8th grade math, and he tells me, you don't have to take any more math ever to go to a Cal State University. So I'm like, I hate math. I'm not signing up. So I sign up for these other classes and I go home, and my mom gets home from school and she's like, how'd things go today? Great. I'm all registered. I go, Mom, do you know I don't have to take any more math? And she goes, well, what are you talking about? I said, the counselor said that to go to a Cal State University, I don't have to take any more math. Well, I used to wear my hair parted down the center with two pigtail things. She grabbed one, threw me into the car, and back to the school we go. Whereupon she has this conversation with the counselor, like, I know you, like Denise's father and myself, don't want to limit her choices to the Cal State University system. And it was all like downhill from there. For the rest of my academic career and my brothers and sisters, because this guy becomes a counselor at Muir, where my brother goes, and my sister ends up after her stint in Catholic school. And the state of my mother's health was always one of the questions that got asked. So anyway, I've just thought about that, and going to school every day with the National Guard, and being the only Black kid in a classroom because I was a mentally gifted minor, and just, all I want to do is be a kid, but the timing was really bad. And integrating clubs and being ostracized and being young. I was 17. I didn't turn 18 until the October of my freshman year. So I was already on the younger side. And, I had some I look back, I had some maturity issues. But back then, you didn't get any allowances for that. It was your grade, and you did what your grade did. And my grade was going on to college. So certainly in my household, there was not going to be anything holding you back. My mom had gone to University of Illinois at 16. And so it was kind of like, so what's the problem here? So Westmont was a good choice for me. I loved it. I still love it. I didn't understand some of what was happening, like the day I arrived, and my roommate was Black and we had nothing in common. And even at 17, I thought, why did I spend all that time with my roommate, essay or whatever you do, to end up with Edna? Not a bad person, we could not have been more different if someone had engineered it. And the pain of that and the disappointment of that. I can remember the night I went to the resident director's house and I said, I get a new room today or I'm calling my parents to come and pick me up. I can't do this any longer. And so they moved my room, and that was so unnecessary, Gayle.
Denise, as you look at it, what were kind of the blind spots of the college? You've shared some of this. You've always been so discreet. As you look back on it, what do you understand now?
So I was told years later that the fact that there were 2 Black freshman girls made resolving the roommate situation easy. They would simply put us together. So, I was raised pretty naive, and I think that Black parents, at least in much of my generation, tried to shield their children from their experiences. Yeah. And so I was pretty naive. I still think that I have naivete because of how I was raised. And so I think that was the college's way of solving it. It made it easy. And even with that, I only went to a resident director. I didn't know to go to a dean or somebody who had, to me, an RD had power.
Right.
And so at that point, I didn't have any other advocates on campus. So I went to the only people I knew to go to. In terms of the college institutionally, that was really the biggest racial issue we ever had. Like I've said, Dwight Small, as a sociologist, I think, and as the chaplain during those years, or at least my first couple of years, I think that he either saw or sensed something while he never showed partiality, but he'd hang back, and if I was walking, he'd come up and, we would just walk and chat or different things like that. And he was the closest thing to acknowledging that I was not like other people on campus as anyone until I declared a major. He just holds, even though I never took a class from him, he just holds an amazing place in my heart because I don't think anybody knew what to do. It was 1970. And 2 years before, on the cover of the Horizon, there'd been the whole thing, should Audrey have ever been at Westmont kind of thing. Thank God I did not know about that until, recently, or my parents, because I think that they would have definitely put their feet down and not allowed me to come. But I quickly met friends. I mean, lifelong to today friends in those first days. I mean, both men and women who have been part of my life's journey, my academic journey, when I went to grad school, the ups and downs of my life. I found even my pastor marvels at the fact that I have these 45-year-old relationships.
No,
he's just like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
It's not downside. I went through a time when I thought, oh man, I wish I had gone to, an historically Black college. My sister went to Spelman. My formation academically, spiritually, intellectually happened largely at 955 La Paz Road. So to extract that from who I am, I don't know who I'd be left to be. I'd be the 17-year-old spinning around, aimlessly. And so, yeah, I didn't expect for Westmont to be a lifelong connection in the way that it has been connection, not in relation to the friendships and relationships, but just in terms of the association. I just didn't see that would ever happen, especially after I'd been an RD and I left campus and I thought, God, if you are real, I will never see this place again. I will never hear from this place again. I want to erase it forever from my consciousness. But Westmont is like the dad in the prodigal son, and you can always come home.
Well, we are so glad you came home.
You are listening to Westmont's Compelling Conversations with President Gayle D. Beebe.
Tell me about, as your career has unfolded and all of the interlacing that has included the college. And when we first met, I believe it was when we first met, you were the president of the Alumni Association. Actually,
I wasn't president yet, but I soon became the president. Yeah. So certainly I hated the class. We all hated the class. But as freshmen, when we had interterm, your freshman or your first year as a transfer, you had to take that stupid Christian perspectives on learning. It's almost like an inoculation, Gayle. You get the shot, you hate the shot, and then years later, you don't get the disease or you have the disease. I don't know which one it is. But implanted in my head in the taking of that class was that who you are spiritually, academically, in every way is all intertwined. And so you don't leave your faith at the door when you go to a job. And that was really poignant to me. And from the very first job I ever had, I've never been what I would call a Bible thumper, but I've also never been one to deny that I'm a person of faith. I had a manager one time. I had thrown something really important away, and I went to him and I said, Dave, I have to tell you, the file that you're looking for, I threw away. I said, I remember the moment that I looked at it and thought, do I keep it or do I throw it out? And I threw it out. He just looked at me and he goes, I'm really mad you threw it away. He goes, but you just have to know that your integrity means so much to me. And I was just like, that's the first time it just kind of hit me really hard that I was a fully integrated woman, a fully integrated human being. And I could absolutely trace it back to those 2 weeks of classes and how it got planted and seated in my being, and how it grew and has grown over the years. I think that there's probably no one in the last 40 years who has worked with me or for me who does not know that I'm a person of faith. I've worked in human resources other than the few years at Westmont. I've never not hired anyone who's had Westmont College on their resume. I think my faith is everything to me. And I think that a Westmont education helped me integrate it in a different way than my friends who are Christians who didn't go to a Christian college or didn't have a similar experience to me don't integrate. I mean, it was just, at Westmont, even 90+% of my friends were Christian. I mean, and on a continuum, I didn't have this, of course, the spiritual maturity then that I had now, but I was never the worst kid and I was never the best kid. I was pretty much in the middle and a steady Freddy. My friends were drinking and dancing when we weren't supposed to do either. And they were wondering why we didn't have more chapel than we already had. I mean, they just, they span the spectrum. And I think that they probably still do. That's why I believe so strongly in a Christian liberal arts education, because it launched me into a kind of success that I didn't even know I wanted or needed. And for graduate school, I don't know how well you know Dave Lawrence. I don't know if he was still there when you came or not.
His last year was my first year, and then Dave and Carol have attended Montecito Covenant, and so we've gotten to know him very well after, or reasonably well, yeah.
Okay, so Dave was the epitome of a person I wanted to emulate, and he had attended American University. And at the time, I wanted to have a degree in public administration, and there were only 3 schools in the country that offered them: Boston U, American U, and UT Austin, I believe. My mother, after she had finished University of Illinois, had moved to Washington, D.C. with some sorority sisters. And I thought, I'm going to do what Mom did. I'm going to move to Washington, D.C. So I applied to American. And then, I thought, this is great because that's where Dr. Lawrence went. And so I applied to I only applied to Westmont undergrad. I only applied to AU for graduate school. And I don't know if you heard my chapel talk or not, but my grades were not the greatest in the world. I wasn't flunking out of Westmont by any stretch of the imagination, but there were no cords around my gown. And I was afraid that maybe I wouldn't be admitted to American or any place else. And I can remember telling my dad I was going to apply through the EEO office. And he's like, so who's going to be financing your education? And I go, what do you mean? And he goes, no, he says, in life, you've got to learn to walk through the same door everyone else walks through, or else you are not entitled to get the spoils that the people who did got.
Wow.
And so I thought, well, I have no money, or no money that would get me even out of LA, say nothing of pay a tuition and living expenses. And so I applied without going through the EEO office and was accepted. And that was a hugely defining learning point for me, because what I didn't know, Gayle, was what I didn't know then was that at multiple intervals in my life, people would question my qualifications to be in a place, in a room, in a situation. And I knew that I had done the work that was required at every turn to be wherever it was I was. And I think that had I and my father not taken that hard stand, I don't know that I would have learned the lesson or appreciated it or been able to just be strong in all the subsequent situations that came up that neither he nor I could have ever imagined. So.
Oh, that's beautiful. If you told that story in your message, I don't remember it this way. And so that's just an amazingly powerful story of how that has totally shaped you. Denise, as you look at the college and as we are just coming off of our most recent board meeting, continuing to really try to just make headway and to bring to bear the right conversations, the right decisions, the right personnel to campus and kind of move deeper into the 21st century in a really meaningful way on the issues of race, diversity, equity, inclusion. What do you hope for the college?
This is not realistic, but I wish that we could be the kingdom of God and all of what I believe that to represent. And my understanding of the kingdom is that color, gender, ethnicity, none of those kinds of things really matter. It's really the hearts and the spirit of things that really matter. On the realistic side, and I don't know if you know this, that I'm in a small group with some students and staff at Westmont.
Yeah, the Pursuing Justice.
Yes, I'm in the Pursuing Justice small group.
Journey to Justice, yeah.
Journey to Justice, yes. I love all these names you guys come up with. So let me say this. I'm hopeful about Westmont in the area of race and justice because I was a student when women had no presence, no voice, no power, no nothing. And it was in the middle of the women's movement. In fact, there was a little room up at the post office, tiny room called the Women's Center. And it was filled with books about autobiographies, radicalized thinkers. I remember a copy of the book, Our Bodies, Our Cells, and nobody wanted to touch it because it talked about things, things and all of that, and I can remember, there were a couple women who wouldn't use deodorant and grew hair under their arm, all of that was going on at the same time. And, wanting for women to be regarded differently in the community. And I've seen how women have, over the 40 years, how women have come into their own. And that's the hope that I have relative to race and justice, that whatever transformation or intentionality had to happen for us to get to where we are relative to women, that we would be willing to take the journey to get there relative to race.
Yeah.
And what I know for sure is that it takes time. And what I sense from the students is they want it now. And I have to be very careful because I think I'm probably the oldest person on the call. And they kind of, she's on the board. And I'm like, ladies and gentlemen, this is what the Board of Trustees isn't, and this is what the Board of Trustees is. So, I have to be really, really careful. But that's what I would want, Gayle, for Westmont. I was saddened at our board meeting when I heard that we have faculty members who don't believe that there's a race issue. That was heartbreaking to me. I'm thinking, what, How can that be so? But, the college is a representation of the country, right? And there are people that thought, I have a very good friend who is a Christian and at least initially didn't see much wrong with storming the Capitol. So I have to be willing to give people space for their thoughts and ideas, just like I want people to give me space for mine. To me, it's demonstrative of the fact that we have a long, hard journey. And you understand this because you have Black friends and associates. And so, not only am I a Black woman, but I have a lot of melanin. And I know, and I've seen the differences in a fair-skinned Black person versus a dark-skinned Black person. I hear from people some of the conversations that still happen on campus. I was thinking in preparation for our time together, I have a very, very, very dear Westmont friend, and I can remember I was either 17 or 18, and he came running up to me one day at the DC and said, "Oh my gosh, Denise, I've told my parents all about you." And I told them, the only thing wrong with her is that she's Black. And Gayle, at the time, something said, huh? But, I was 17 or 18, but I've never forgotten that. The only thing wrong with me was that I was Black. And so even though by the time our students get to Westmont, they're 17 and 18 years old, there is still the ability to kill the spirit, or at least assail the spirit. And I mean, you're an intelligent person, how words can harm us and words can help us.
Yeah.
And so I worry about the words because I know that they're out there. John chapter 1 speaks so much about the power of the word and what God's word meant, and what it doesn't necessarily go into, but implies is that there's such amazing power in our words.
Yeah.
So anyway,
that's just linger over that a moment, because I think what you said is just very profound, and that is part of our commitment as an administration, as a board, as a college, is to really try and get ahead of some of this. And we want to deploy Dr. Saad and others right at the start of the college career, so that some of these comments that come out of a place of either naivete, ignorance, or even evil, that they recognize it has no place at Westmont. That's one of the goals that I have in terms of leaning heavier into all of our efforts, is we've got to, from the get-go, create a different culture, because there are so many admirable parts to our college culture, but we also have this lingering capacity to say things that actually do harm. And I really want us to do our best to root that out.
Well, Gayle, it's hard because I'm not on campus and I don't interact with students as frequently as I once did. And I've used this example before, if you have never interacted with a person of color, regardless of what that looks like, and you come to Westmont, it is still possible for you not to interact with that group of people. The problem then becomes, as you go into the larger society, in work, in housing, in whatever, when you encounter the other, what comes to mind is not your friend who's Black or Hispanic or Asian, but images largely from the media or from whatever way students are absorbing their information. And I would like to think, as an educated person, as an educator, as just a person who believes so strongly in education, that a well-educated 22-year-old person of faith would not be afraid to be in a room with a group of people. Let me back up. A white college graduate of Westmont goes to a job, would not be afraid to be in a room with a group of people who are diverse, because they've never had to interact, or their only impression of a person like that would be, whatever the media portrays. That isn't all, whatever the media portrays, and is often then repeated, and that's oftentimes negative.
Well, I so much hope that we can move towards your hope and vision. I really was encouraged by the conversation with the board and the conversations that are happening within the college, but it will take a sustained effort and a long obedience in the same direction, to borrow the book title. But that's really what this is about, in terms of getting the college to a new place that lives into the 21st century in a way that's really impactful.
But Gail, I have to tell you that after the George Floyd incident,
Mm.
probably 3 or 4 Westmont friends reached out.
Wow.
Are you okay? And I was really shocked because they weren't necessarily, they're dear friends, but they're not friends that I interact with consistently.
Yeah.
And I thought, I have just been so amazingly blessed to have these really remarkable, decades-long relationships. And I know that some of them politically have points of view that are different from me, but I have found that it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. And I think that that's one of the keys, is that we tolerate in our same race relationships variations of thought that we don't tolerate interracially.
Oh, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah. And so I have a couple of friends and I've said, look, we may not stay friends forever, but I'll tell you one thing, it will never be about politics or race. We are not going to be friends because of those two things.
Yeah.
We're going to take those off the table. Now, if something else leads us to friendship divorce, I'm good, but it's not going to be that.
Well, Denise, you are a huge blessing. I always love the opportunity to interact with you. And thank you so much for giving me time and giving our college time. It's just an incredible blessing.
Join us next time for another compelling conversation with President Gayle D. Beebe.